All right, welcome everybody. Nice to see one of you on board your boat. That's excellent. Um, so yeah, we're gonna get started. We're just waiting for a few more folks to join, and we'll get started. So thanks very much. Hope everybody's having a good day. Yeah, Garrett. Okay. Thanks for getting up early to see this. Yeah, we'll make it worth your while there. Yeah, so I'm on board my boat here in Seattle, and we've got Lucas in our tech support department down in Portland, and Matt and Heidi on the East Coast answering questions as well. So the way the format's going to work today, this is a little different, and actually, you guys are the only folks to see this one live. We're going to record it and then kind of use this later for other people, but yeah, because it's a little different. So we've got a number of different sort of what I consider, basic and standard network and NMEA and NMEA 2000 connection devices, and I'll be kind of showing those as we go. And then we'll get into the more advanced Fruno network stuff. So I've got a radar and an MFD, and we can get into some Wi-Fi setup and different things like that. So definitely, if you have questions, ask away in the chat. Feel free to just chat those to everybody, and either Lucas can type out an answer, or I can respond depending on what it is. All right, so just give it another second there, and we'll get going. All right. So and this actually applies, the connection wizards similar for both TIMEZERO Navigator and TIMEZERO Professional. But in the menu here, we've got our connection wizard. And so the first thing that we're going to want to make sure whenever we do set up a new system is that all of the devices are plugged in and working, and we've got power to everything, and so the software can see all of the devices that we have access to. If for some reason you're running another piece of software, let's say like a Meritron N2K view, you want to actually have that one unplugged, because one of the issues we have is you can only have one COM port or network port accessed from one piece of software. So if we were to have both pieces open, and TIMEZERO grabbed the piece of hardware that another device was using and set it up, that other piece of software wouldn't be able to access it. So in this case right now, we just have TIMEZERO running, and I'm going to go ahead and plug in. So this is our most basic, USB GPS unit here. We used to sell these. The manufacturer is out of them, and so there's a couple of other devices online. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and computer found it. And so we're just going to hit automatic port configuration, and then hit next. And it's going to take a look. And what we're doing in the background while that little bar is going is we're actually looking at all of the COM ports that are available on the system. And we're going to look at that at 4800 baud, and we're going to look at it at 38,400. And so those are the two most common speeds. So if you have a device that has a weird port speed, you're going to need to manually set that up. Same thing as if you have a device that has a UDP connection, you'll need to set that up manually as well. Same thing if you have like a Vesper AIS that you're getting over Ethernet or over Wi-Fi, you'll have to set that up manually. Also, it's recommended that whenever possible, start the software with everything plugged in. You can see that this has taken a moment to kind of scan through and look for devices there. So we'll see if I have to restart the software or if it comes up. It was finding things when I was testing this out earlier, so we don't have to wait for the software to start and restart. Okay, so there's a couple of connections here. So you'll see I've got my COM5, so that is actually my AIS unit. COM7, which is just this little GPS, and NMEA 2000. So I'm going to go ahead and delete COM5 and the NMEA 2000, just go with the most basic system here. And that's something that you could do, you know, if you had another piece of software that you needed to save a COM port for. So we'll hit next, and we should just get position. And where are we? So this GPS unit is still booting up, and I'm inside my boat, so it's probably not giving me a great signal. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to unplug that guy. And now I see that I've lost, and I have a poor GPS alarm, and I've lost it. So we're actually going to switch over to something that has an external antenna. And we're going to just do my AIS unit here. Allow me to unplug a couple of things. And again, I'm just going to do an automatic port configuration. And with that, one of the things to note is if you already have something set up and working on your system and you need to add to it, and it was a sort of custom configuration, you can always add devices one at a time afterwards. If you use the automatic port configuration, one of the things that it's going to do is actually going to wipe all your settings out. So it's going to sort of delete the stuff that wasn't working and start over. So depending on, you know, whether you want to start a new connection and just start everything from scratch, or you need to add to an existing system, you can do that. So, all right, so COM5, that's which serial port it is. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to name this. So I'm going to double click and I'm going to name this, I think this is my ACR AIS unit. And while we're on sort of COM port connections, there's a couple of different things, and Lucas can post some links to these shortly. So I know for a fact that that is an older AIS unit. I've had it for a number of years on the boat. And so that's actually an RS-232 connection. And so when we talk about serial data connections, there's two main types, RS-232 and RS-422. And the difference between 232 and 422 is a common ground. So with RS-232, you have one ground and then a sort of a talker side and a listener side. With RS-422, you've got a ground and a talker and a ground and a listener. And it's really important to use the right adapters for these different kinds of connections. So, you know, what can happen is, you know, nothing, or you can actually blow the NMEA chip in the back of your electronics. I know that some of the Furuno sounders are real susceptible to this. And so it's really important to verify with the owner's manual what devices you actually have. And so we've got a couple of devices that we recommend for USB to serial. If you have a serial connection like I do on my, so that's a DB9 connector on the end of this one. And this device is made by Sea Level, and they have some of the best and really stable drivers. These are PC only drivers, so if you're doing stuff on a Mac, you're going to need to use a different device. But the Sea Level ones are really good. They're a little bit spendy, but they're optically isolated, and they're a really good connection. And on the back, you won't be able to, you might be able to see that. There's actually a pinout on what the connection is. The other one that we recommend are these guys. So this is a USB on one end to bare wire on the other end. I've got some test leads because I use this actually for, you know, testing various connections. That's why those funky things are on there. And they make this in both an RS-232 version, which is this guy, and then an RS-422 version, which is this guy. And they're you know, 15 to 25 bucks on Amazon. If you have the choice, pick one of these that uses the FTDI driver. FTDI is a really stable driver setup. It's a lot better than the plurific drivers, and you know, you can chat with us about why. But it's important to get drivers that are stable, especially with Windows 10. You know, they've actually started booting some of the counterfeit drivers and counterfeit hardware off of there. The other thing that we have, and unfortunately ActiSense, I just found out, discontinued this product. So this is a USG1. So this is one of their older, so it's USB on one side. And this one does both RS-232 and RS-422. And it's got wiring for both, optically isolated. It's got nice indicator lights that flash. You can probably still find these guys as well. And ActiSense has made a number of new sort of NMEA 0183 devices. And those all work really well, and they're very stable. I think this one is probably 200 bucks. So they're definitely a bit spendier, but you know, they work very well. Okay, so that's it on COM ports and drivers. If you run this connection wizard and your device doesn't show up, the two troubleshooting, oh yeah, there we go. Thanks, Lucas. The USG2 there, just replace that. Make sure that in the Windows Device Manager that you actually see the device, and make sure that the drivers are installed and things like that. With the FTDI, it should be pretty automatic with a current build of Windows. All right, so systems found it. We have position detected, course over ground, speed over ground detected, and AIS detected. So what that is telling us from the software is that we have analyzed the data stream that's coming out of that device, and we have shown that there's position, we have shown that there's, and we see the sentence. If you've connected an AIS unit and you're in an area that has no other vessels transmitting, your AIS down here may not show as detected, and so you can manually check that. If there's a sentence from a device that's coming across, I know DSC is another one for radios, that it can be difficult to initiate the DSC test call during that detection process. So if you know that it's going to be coming across and you've verified, you've seen it working, you can go ahead and check that. So we'll hit next. And right now we have position, course over ground, speed over ground, and then and AIS. You'll notice it doesn't say master, but it does say selected and detected. So we're going to hit next, hit finish, and give it a second. And now I should be able to center back on the vessel. And here we are in Seattle. So I can see my AIS target starting to populate. What's bad about checking all? So when we get into a bit more complex system, Patrick, I'll show you kind of what the difference between having everything checked and having just the check marks coming across for the correct device on the correct port. We had a problem recently, and it's actually been corrected from Vesper AIS units that were coming across. They had some extra characters. If that's a problem for anybody, that we know is coming across over NMEA 2000, but it seemed to be okay on either Wi-Fi or NMEA 0183. You would see a bunch of extra characters show up in these names. Get a hold of us, and we can work with you on an update for that. So that's the so that's the basic part of AIS. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my NMEA 2000 gateway, and we're going to go ahead and rerun that connection wizard. And again, for NMEA 2000, so in this case, instead of doing an automatic port configuration, I'm going to do a manual port configuration. And I know that I'm looking for an NMEA 2000, so we'll select that and select next. and we'll see if it finds it. Connection succeeded. And actually, I'm going to go back for a quick second. So this is something new that we've introduced with with version 4.1, both in TIMEZERO Navigator and TIMEZERO Professional. If you connect the NMEA 2000 gateway, what we're going to do is actually decode all of the PGNs. And so you can actually see what's coming across your NMEA 2000 network. Yeah, so Lucas just posted the link to that. And what device I'm using is this ActiSense NMEA 2000 gateway. So USB on one side, NMEA 2000 on the other. In fact, this is the only way to get NMEA 2000 into the software. If you try and use a NMEA 2000 to serial and adapt it and bring it in, we're not going to get full advantage of the NMEA 2000 network. We're just going to get sort of what sentences are translated over to NMEA 0183. And that's actually the same with this other device. If I have it here. Right. So this guy, which is the Meritron version of the same thing. So this is proprietary to Meritron software, which you need if you're going to, say, program one of their tank level senders or swing one of their compasses or use the N2K view software. And you can connect one of these and you'll get some data. But what comes out of it for our purpose is just translated 0183 sentences, not actually the full NMEA 2000 information. That's proprietary to their software. So just something to note. Do run into that from time to time. All right, and the other thing you can do here now is you can actually hit pause, and we can go back and scroll through what, yeah, the Vesper with USB connection works fine, yeah. The only note about that, Gustavo, is that if you wanted to access the Vesper software and our software at the same time, you'd have to shut one down before you could open the other one up. So yeah, so I've got a bunch of stuff here. I've got wind, heading, rate of turn, and we're going to go and we'll hit next, and we'll show what the software is actually going to detect. All right, so we still have our AIS coming in on COM5, and now with NMEA 2000, you can see everything else that's connected. So right now, I've got position, date and time, heading, magnetic variation, depth. So I have a DT800, so one of the smart NMEA 2000 transducers. I know that the temperature thermistor broke in it or died about 5 years ago, but you know, I replaced it and it lasted for 6 months, so that's a really common one. Wind angle, I've got an anemometer on the boat. It's an older Garmin anemometer, so it's got barometric pressure, it's got wind speed, air temperature, and then I have a Fruno satellite compass as well. So pitch, roll, and heave. Tank level, I've got 2 fuel tanks that I have tied into the system. AIS, and so because I do a lot of testing here, one of the things that I have is actually the a ship module device, and it's a really kind of tweaky data converter, but that takes NMEA 0183 and puts it onto my NMEA 2000 network. So why would I, we were talking a little bit about why not check everything. So one of the things that we have seen, and it's really common here in Seattle and probably common in really congested harbors, is that if you're using position coming from a AIS unit and you have another position sensor on the boat, and this is set as your master, one of the things that can happen is you'll actually see the vessel kind of jump on the screen where it looks like it's kind of pulsing. And the reason is that on an AIS COM port, its priority, so not even what we're listening for, but its output priority is going to be other vessels' position, and then your VDO. So there's two sentences: own ship and targets. And so what will happen is the targets will get prioritized over the own ship message. So you can see a little lag in your AIS, in your position if it's coming from an AIS. It's not usually as big of a problem coming over NMEA 2000 because the bandwidth, the speed is a lot faster. Same thing if you were to use that over Wi-Fi, the speed is a lot faster. So I'm going to hit, so we'll just give this a nickname again. We'll call this ActiSense. The other thing that's important to talk about with NMEA 2000 is what happens when you have multiple devices giving out the same information. And so in NMEA 2000 protocol, there's a standard for what they call instance number. And instance number is sort of gives priority to different devices. So the lower the number, the higher the priority. I have both a GPS unit, so it's a little Furuno GP33B. It's a little puck about that big on the mast. And I also have a satellite compass. I know that I want position and heading coming out of the satellite compass, and so that has a lower instance. And to set this, the sort of instance priority, you're going to need to use a software. Well, ActiSense comes with the NMEA reader, and so you can use that to set the instance numbers, or you can use N2K view from Maritron, and you can set the instance numbers there. Be careful if you have a multifunction display on the network. Sometimes those devices will also re-instance the network kind of on the fly. I know that Furuno does, and they have what's called source selection. So you can pick which device you actually want to output speed and which device you want for heading, if you have like a fluxgate compass and a satellite compass. So on more complex systems, it's important to understand kind of what's going on in the background. And you just kind of understand what the manufacturer is doing when they're kind of either re-instancing it or they're just taking data from different devices. We don't have that sort of source selection like an MFD does, and so we rely on proper instancing from either N2K view or from NMEA reader. Where can I buy the ActiSense interfaces? I don't see them on Amazon. Yeah, so I don't believe they're actually sold on Amazon. They're sold usually through third-party or dealer vendors. So in the United States, they're distributed by Gemico. They're a wholesale distributor, and they usually resell to, there's some online dealers that sell them, or most local marine electronics shops should stock them. I can list half a dozen places in Seattle that sell them, but yeah, usually there should be your local marine electronics dealer, or if you have a good online source. Yeah, and then the reader you can download from free. They also have a NMEA logger as well that you can download. Getting back to my system, one thing I see that is unchecked, which is engine. I have I do have an engine gateway, but it's it's not checked because my engine's off, and so the gateway's off. So that's something I would have to rerun with the system on. Right now, the only thing we're taking from the engine is fuel flow. And so we use tank level and fuel flow to compute your range circle and sort of your burn rate. In the future, we'll have more advanced engine and other sort of non-navigation sensors. All right, so we'll hit next. And then we go into our master selection. So, this is where having devices that don't actually output. So if you had multiple COM ports and they're sort of output, you have them all checked. One of the things that will happen is you'll actually have a bunch of stuff to sort of sort through. And so I'm going to go, I want position and course over ground coming from my NMEA 2000 network. And then, if there is a problem with that, it will automatically fall back to the next one in line. In this case, it's going to be my AIS unit. So if you, for example, had another NMEA gateway connection that didn't have position, but that position box was checked, what would happen is it would have to sort through all those different COM ports until it found the one that worked. The other thing that's new with version 4.0 and 4.1 is NMEA 2000 Autopilot output. So we had sort of at the end of version 3 some options for doing that sort of on a case-by-case basis, but now we do support all of the NMEA 2000 Autopilot PGNs. And it does work quite well. Personally, I've tested it with the Furuno NavPilot 700. I've tested it with some Garmin autopilots. I've tested it with the Simrad AP70. And I know that both the names and the labels of the AI or the waypoints translate very well, and waypoint switching and things like that works well. So that's a new feature. The other thing that this does is if you have that NMEA 2000 Autopilot output checked and you have either a deck display from like a GMI 10 or a GMI 20 or a FI 70 or one of the Raymarine ones, it doesn't really matter what brand it is. They will accept that autopilot sentence for bearing to waypoint display and ETA calculation display and things like that. Right now, the protocol for route transfer over NMEA 2000 isn't widely used. It is there, but it's not being used. So, so while we can have things show up as the display, they don't show up the full route on a plotter. All right, so we'll hit next, and we're ready to apply. Give this a quick second. There we go. And so now, in addition to position, now I have heading for the vessel. You know, we can see more information. Already, I have apparent wind angle in my nav data display. And so we can actually go in now and we can go ahead and add more things. So let's see here. Yeah, so let's add, we'll add depth. Got that. If I click on one of my AIS targets, I can get target information, and there's that scrolling AIS list, which is live now. One thing that we would also need to do is in our options menu at this point and my apologies for hunting for this. But I'm looking for our tank setup. So here's something else as we're scrolling through to take a look at. Because I have a ActiSense gateway and I have a Furuno satellite compass, we now give you the ability to program directly from the software heading, pitch, and roll offsets for a satellite compass. So again, that's something that's new with this version of the software. Oh, really? And the interface between Pro and Navigator has caught me off guard once again. The fuel tank information is only available in TIMEZERO Professional, so my apologies for that. All right, so we've got that done. So now I've got network or NMEA 2000 network, and if I was to have my autopilot on, I could build a route and drive that directly from the software. So the next one I'm going to do, and I'm going to pause my video for a quick second while I plug in some Ethernet cables in the back of the system. All right. Is it going to work here? All right. So the next Actually, before I move on to Ethernet devices, are there any questions on NMEA 0183 or NMEA 2000 that we didn't touch on or you'd like to go over? I'll do a little bit on autopilot output here in a minute. All good there? Okay. So for Ethernet devices, so this is going to be either a Code and Insight radar or a Furuno radar or Furuno standalone sounder. The first thing that we need to do is make sure that we are set on the Furuno Ethernet network. So on our device, on our computer, we're going to need to go ahead and configure the Ethernet gateway to start with. So select Ethernet, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go to Properties. And we're going to select TCP IPv4, so this guy here. And we're going to select Properties. And what we need to do is set the IP address range for the Furuno equipment. And there's some specific instructions if you're setting up one of the old Code and radars, and there's even more complicated instructions on setting up a Code and radar with a Furuno sounder. But Lucas, if you can throw in the chat the default IP address and subnet there. What we want to make sure is that both the IP address is set to 172.31.3.something. In the user guide, it says 150. But one of the things about Ethernet is it's important that you're not having two devices on the same network with the same IP address. And since I often use this computer to troubleshoot other people's vessels, I've set my IP address a little bit differently to make sure that I don't instantly cause a conflict when I plug it in. So if you have two computers on the same network, you can have one at 150 and one at 151. And then hit OK. And hit close. It's important if you're doing this for the first time to do this with TIMEZERO closed, because we're going to look for that IP address upon startup. And we're going to go over, so now that that's done, we'll go back to the software here. And we're going to go and see if it found my radar, which it did not. So quick exit of the software and a restart. All right. And now one of the things that you can see is I actually have other devices appearing. So now I have my radar, which wasn't there originally. And now if I select standby, I can actually transmit my radar. So there we go. And that happens automatically in the software. So if you have a radar that's plugged in and it's not showing up and you don't get that radar tab, two things to check, obviously, is to make sure that you have the appropriate software module. So I have that here. The Furuno radar module is enabled, and that the radar is powered and turned on. And that just happens automatically in the software. So now if I go back to our device list, you'll see the radar, and you'll see one of my other Furuno sounders. That one's not compatible with this software version, but what I can do next is actually go ahead and turn on my MFD, because I have a TZT2 as well, and that's where I have my sounder. So pardon me while I go for a quick walk. All right, so my Furuno MFD is booting up. One of the other things that we've done in version 4.1 of the software is we have eliminated the need to rerun the connection wizard if you have an MFD and that's turned on and then it gets turned off. We'll actually be a little bit more dynamic about that, and we'll be able to go in and sort of see that connection change on the fly. So give that a couple of seconds to boot up. And while it's not fully on the screen over there, I do already have a sounder transmitting, which is great. And I still have my radar there as well. And so what we want to do real quick, so we'll go with my options again. And now you'll see my MFD is listed in the device list. And under sounder, I have my sounder source there as well. And yeah, a quick note. So compatibility wise for Ethernet devices, so it's going to be Furuno radars and Furuno sounders, with the exception of the old Code and Insight radars. So those will work. All right. Since I have turned that on, I'm going to go ahead. I'm actually going to rerun that connection wizard one more time. And we'll just do an automatic port configuration, so we'll let it figure itself out. And and this is sort of a special case for the Furuno hardware, we get another option. It's called NavNet. And what that is basically NMEA 0183 over Ethernet. And so it has an automatic port that it's going to find in the background, and it's going to grab, I hear it beeping, so that's a good sign. It's going to go ahead and grab whatever the NavNet sensor selection is. So if on that TZT2, now that it's turned on, it's using its own depth sounder for depth, that's the depth it's going to use in the software. And this would work similarly on other manufacturers' MFDs, that if it goes through and changes that sensor priority over NMEA 2000, it starts outputting, maybe it has a built-in GPS, maybe it has a built-in depth sounder. It's going to grab all that stuff. So. Just one more second. So in the past, yeah, if you turned off your MFD, you had to rerun the connection wizard, and that's one of the things that we've actually fixed with version 4.1 is that we are now going to be dynamic. We'll wait for about a minute if we don't see the MFD on the network, and then we will start outputting heading to the radar and things like that. And then once the NavNet is turned back on, then it will be automatic. All right, so as you can see, it erased the labels that I had there. So on COM5, we'll just say AIS unit. NavNet NMEA. So this is what's coming over Ethernet from the MFD. And so now IOC surface temperature is detected, which wasn't before, because the transducer I have does have a speed through the water and temperature sensor. You'll notice that speed through the water is not checked, however, and the reason for that is since I have updated the software on the MFD, I have not taken the boat off the dock. We're still in quarantine here, so I need to go and actually run the boat to get that paddle wheel spinning. Once the paddle wheel is spinning, then it'll actually start outputting that speed through the water sentence. And that's actually pretty common with a lot of sounders with paddle wheels. If you have an NMEA 2001 where the paddle wheel is built into the bottom of the sensor, you can just pull it out of the boat, give it a spin, and it'll actually note that it's working. And so that's a good trick if you're trying to commission something and set it up and not run the boat. NavNet fast heading. So this is the MFD taking that heading sensor and outputting it on the Ethernet. And of course, we still have NMEA 2000. All right. Again, we're going to enable NMEA 2000 autopilot output. And that's really the simplest way for autopilot output these days. All of the PGNs, so the group numbers that are required or output over the network automatically. All right. Any questions on that? DSC. Yeah, so for DSC, and let's see if I can get DSC to work, because I know I've got a DSC radio. So options. So in the connection wizard, so here's the advanced class. So we're going to do a manual port configuration. Yeah, so what you would need to do is, so if it's a NMEA 2000 DSC radio, if you don't see it in that list, you can check it. So you can actually just check that box that says DSC. Let me see here. So I was mentioning I've got this other kind of tweaky device. So what I'm going to do is, actually, I can't simulate that right now. So that's one thing I can't simulate. If you have another vessel that has DSC and you can do a DSC call, it'll automatically do it. The skiff that I have a radio in isn't here right now, so I can't do the polling request that I was using. But you would see sort of one of those DSC lines pop up here, or the DSC PGN. But what I would end up doing is just going in and manually checking that that box for DSC, which I'll do here in a second. So the other device that I have that's on my boat's network is this guy. So this is an ActiSense W2K-1, and that's another device that I can use to get position and 0183 data into the software. Yeah, so yeah, you should be able to see that DSC MOB with that sentence enabled. Do you know, Gustavo, does when you do a test call on your Raymarine VHF, does that output that DSC call onto the CAN bus? I'm not sure it does, and that's sort of one of the, I think this is probably one of the trickier things to catch, because the DSC call is pretty quick. So yeah, when I set this up and tested it myself, what I ended up doing was I have a radio in my skiff and I have a radio on the boat. And so I would do a position poll request. So where I know the MMSI number of my skiff, I call my skiff from my boat, it replies back with a position, and I was able to capture that, one DSC sentence sort of with the connection wizard open. So it's kind of tricky. Is version 4 backward compatible with version 2.1? Hardware-wise, it should be. The only thing, and Lucas can chime in on this one a little bit, is if in addition to version 4, you also were to upgrade to Windows 10, you may have some driver compatibility issues. But for the most part, everything, if it's working on your PC, it should work with version 4. And I'm going to qualify that with it should, with a pretty high likelihood. Yeah, the system requirements for the computer are different, but yeah. If you want, you can email us your a report with a little bit of system information, and we can let you know to verify before you upgrade. All right. So that's DSC. Yeah, and actually one of the things that I did, I sort of did a poor man's skiff tracker with that DSC. So in my on my skiff, I could just turn the radio on, and I don't actually have to have the volume all the way up. And then I set up on the big boat, you can do automatic position polling request. And that way, if something to happen, if I lost it in the fog, or if somebody's out using it and I'm on the boat, I can kind of keep an eye on them, and it does that in the background. So it works actually pretty well. All right, so the last one that we're going to cover here is Autopilot output. So on this one, we'll do Connection Wizard, and this is where we're going to use that data output. So we'll go next, and we'll configure a serial port. And so this one, I'm going to go ahead and we'll pretend that COM5 is my Autopilot. I remember it's my AIS. And this is where going through and spending some time with the manual for your Autopilot is really important. And, to know what sentences, what NMEA talker ID it wants, what version of, if it's an older device that takes an older version of NMEA, get a hold of us if you're having any issues. But the majority of them are going to want AAM, APB, and XTE. Sometimes they want either RMB or RMC. Well, that'll be listed in your specific Autopilot. And again, this is one of those where, it's relatively straightforward. The two things where I see people have issues is that they get the talker and listener wires crossed. And so it's really nice if on your Autopilot, you have like an NMEA reader, or it at least tells you what your sentences coming in are. I know on the Freenet, like the old NavPilot 500, once you connect to it and you were to enable this and select a route, that it would give you a kind of list of what sentences it's seeing. And again, we talked about this a little bit yesterday for those of us that were on the call, but magnetic north, true north, or both, depending on what baud rate your Autopilot is set to, it's actually really easy to overload the number of sentences that, and actually the number of total characters that you can get on that port. So it's important to make sure that if you don't have a true heading sensor, you're only using magnetic, for example, things like that. And then in the Connection Wizard, one last time, under data sources. And again, it's going to go through and do a little quick analyzing, which I know isn't the most exciting stuff, but you'll be able to see that that COM port listed as your Autopilot out. I'm just going to take a minute here and read through some of these messages. So this is a way that you can, go ahead and pick and choose if there's, maybe I won't need to add DSC to one of those COM ports that didn't find it automatically. And then this is showing sort of the list here with what is coming from which port, and then output. So I've got both the NMEA 2000 Autopilot output and my my COM port. Please discuss using TZ. Okay, so Gail, so the question was chart server on a Fruno NavNet 3D. So one of the things that we need to do, and there's a little bit of a technical difference here between having our system IDs linked and using that as a chart server. While we can link any of the TIMEZERO products with the Fruno MFDs, as long as you have either the sounder module or the radar module, one of the two Fruno modules, you will get chart sharing. However, there is a different system ID, and you'll see that in the about TIMEZERO. You'll see that system ID right there, right? Not going to leave that up for everybody to copy, but that system ID is linked to my license and my list of charts, and the Fruno NavNet, either NavNet 3D or TZ Touch or TZ Touch 2 devices, have their own unique system ID. On a vessel that has multiple chart plotters, so if you had two NavNet 3Ds, you'll notice there's a chart server or master switch in there. And what that does is it basically says, okay, I see that box over there is in charge, and I'm going to copy its system ID as long as I'm on the same network. We don't do that. So you actually have to have us link those two accounts, and then we send you a set of unlock codes for the MFD, and we send you a set of unlock codes for the PC. And you do have to download and install the charts on both devices, although you can use the same download. So once you download it, put it on a thumb drive or a hard drive, you can copy it to both the MFD and to the PC. Hopefully that answered your question. If not, feel free to reach out there. And again, yeah, it's one of those things where if you have a question on chart sharing, just get a hold of support, and we're more than happy to help you. Anybody else with questions? Zero chat placement for users to the customer configurations. Yeah, so we do have a Facebook group. There are some Facebook groups on that. And I'm sure I don't spend a huge amount of time on all the forums, but I know that, on the Fruno forum, sometimes it comes up and there's questions on hull truth, things like that. Do I have a schematic showing my equipment and interface? I don't, because it changes a lot, actually. I end up pulling gear on and off the boat, because I both work in the industry and actually, we live aboard our boat here in Seattle. This becomes sort of an interesting test case. But if that's something that, what I'll do here, Jim, I'll throw my email out. And you're more than welcome to shoot me an email. We can, if you have some specific configuration questions, more than happy to answer those for you. Things like that. Is chart sharing the same for Navionics? So, yeah, so we chart share between the Fruno MFDs for the CMAP charts and the Navionics charts that are produced from Map Media. but we do not share with the Navionics app, or actually even our own iPad app, because it's a different chart license. Honestly, a lot of times it comes down to just straight up licensing. You know, we buy that chart data from Navionics and CMAP or Canadian Hydrographic Service or wherever else we're getting chart media. And there's some pretty stringent rules on copyright and what we're allowed to do, what we can share, what we can sell, and, you know, how all that works. So, yeah, and since, you know, since I have it, I'll show you the last one that's on my connection here, which is sort of our Wi-Fi gateway. So again, I was using that Vesper, or not the Vesper, but the ActiSense Wi-Fi gateway, and that works the same as that Vesper AIS unit. So we can do a manual port configuration. And so there's two options. This ActiSense device will work as either a UDP connection or a TCP connection. I believe the Vesper over Wi-Fi only does TCP, and there's a whole host of other ones, yacht devices and digital yachts, and you know, you can check into the like B&G Go Free Wi-Fi works, and so you kind of have to know what the yeah, Vesper on TCP works fine. So you have to know what the port configuration and stuff like that is. Where it gets really complicated is if you're just connecting to this device, then it's no big deal. But if that device has also joined your boat's Wi-Fi network, it can get a little out of control depending on how you have things configured and what your comfortability is with how comfortable you are with networking and things like that. So we, you know, try not to go too crazy into it. But I know that so this works over UDP or TCP, either way. So we'll do a UDP connection. And right now I'm going to pick the Wi-Fi network. So I've got three numbers here. This is the computer's own Wi-Fi or IP address. This is the IP address that's given to me by my Wi-Fi router. And then that's the Fruno Wi-Fi network or Ethernet wired network. So we'll do that. And then, so I know that it's 60,002. And I'll see a little connection succeeded there. So we'll see if it's going to find stuff for me. Weekend support. Yeah, I do. That is, yeah, that's something that I've heard before. And yeah, let me, I'll bring that up to our team and see what we can do. No promises there, Jim. I know that, you know, if you have a local marine electronics dealer that, you know, is available. Sometimes those guys are working weekends, but yeah, it is something that we're definitely limited on. Any other questions from the group while I'm waiting for this to go search and read for sentences? So I didn't find it. So we'll go back, try a TCP connection. There we go. So yeah, so that's a good sign. You know, if you're not getting that scrolling data, there could be a problem with that connection there. So what's nice about this, and I'll go ahead and share my iPad screen while this is kind of waiting, is if you're using our iPad app, you know, that's sort of the same connection that I have for the iPad. that. So it's a very similar connection. So initial setup here and connect to an NMEA gateway. And again, there's my UDP connection that's not working for some reason. And we can go over to TCP. Hopefully. There we go. What's nice about that now that I have my iPad app, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, but we do allow route sharing in between our software and our iPad app. So it's makes a nice on-deck repeater. It's a pretty economical second plotter, things like that, and a nice way to set up at home. Mostly deliver boats and take my computer with a simple way to connect to an autopilot. Whew. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I guess, Joel, how comfortable are you, rewiring, other autopilots? So what I would probably end up with is a kit, very similar to, the test gearbox that I bring with me when I go troubleshoot other vessels. And being able to essentially have, both a ActiSense NGT1. So if you're connecting to vessels that have a NMEA 2000 network, that's actually pretty simple. And I would just pack a spare T, maybe a drop cable, and then that gateway. If I was, having to guess between various other manufacturers, then it's going to be a sort of case-by-case basis on, how many manuals do I have? Is it a CTOC? Is it a Raymarine pilot? As opposed, will it take 0183? Do I need a different adapter? So short answer is no, it's probably not simple unless the boats are identical, because you're going to have a pretty decent collection of manuals that probably aren't on board the boats or easy to find. So that's probably, one of the harder things to do, unfortunately. And that's not so much on our side, but, each manufacturer is going to have a slightly different setup for their autopilots. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you taking your time to spend with us today. Hopefully you got something out of this. And thanks to our team for chatting and support. And, be safe out there and have a good time on the water. And, we're here to help. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and